that his design worked. And I remember sitting there and being so little and thinking,
And I remember sitting there and being so little
wow, what a great, great world he's living in.
and thinking, wow, what a great, great world he's living in.
I mean, that's all I thought.
I mean, that's all I thought.
Wow.
Wow,
For people who know how to do this stuff,
for people who know how to do this stuff,
how to take these little parts and make them work together to do something,
how to take these little parts and make them work together to do something,
well, these people must be the smartest people in the world.
well, these people must to be smartest people in the world.
That was really what went through my head way back then.
That was really what went through my head way back then.
Now I was, of course, too young
Now I was, of course, too young
at that point to decide that I wanted to be
at that point to decide that I wanted to be
an engineer.
an engineer.
That came a few years later.
That came a few years later.
I hadn't even been exposed to science fiction or books
I haven't even been exposed to science fiction or books
about inventors yet.
about inventors yet.
But just then,
But just then,
at that moment,
at that moment,
I could see right before my eyes that whatever my dad was doing, whatever it was important and good.
I could see right before my eyes that whatever my dad was doing, whatever it was important and good.
A couple of years later,
A couple of years later,
I was 6, maybe 7.
I was 6, maybe 7.
I remember Dad demonstrating another piece of equipment for a bunch
I remember Dad demonstrating another piece of equipment for a bunch
of people at his company.
of people at his company.
A big group of people was there.
A big group of people was there.
These weren't just people he worked with, but
These weren't just people he worked with,
also our whole family and other families too.
but also our family and other families too.
I think it was just a drilling machine he was demonstrating.
I think it was just a drilling machine he was demonstrating.
And my dad, even though I was just this little kid,
And my dad, even though I was just this little kid,
told me I would be the one to
told me I would be the one
get to throw the switch to turn it on.
to get to throw the switch to turn it on.
He said I had
To turn it on, to turn it on.
to do it at the exact
He said I had to do it at the exact right time.
right time. I remember worrying about how I would know when the right time was and thinking,
I remember worrying about how I would know when the right time was and thinking,
now? Now?
now,
When should I do this?
when should I do this?
Now?
Now?
My dad was busy talking and joking
My dad was busy talking and joking
with the families of the guys who worked there,
with the families of the guys who worked there,
who were going to watch me do it.
who were going to watch me do it.
Then, suddenly, it felt like the right time.
Then, suddenly, it felt like the right time.
I can't explain why, but
I can't explain why,
I just felt inside it was the right time.
But I just felt inside it was the right time.
So I went ahead and threw the switch.
So I went ahead and threw the switch.
I heard a lot of laughter and I didn't know why.
I heard a lot of laughter and I didn't know why.
Suddenly I realized I had thrown the switch
Suddenly I realized I had thrown the switch
too early.
too early.
Now that I look back on this, I
Now that I look back on this,
see this might be the beginning of my shyness.
I see this might be the beginning of my shyness.
You know, getting butterflies in your stomach because you're afraid of failure when
You know, getting butterflies in your stomach because you're afraid of
you
failure.
have to talk or something. Or maybe
When you have talk or something,
that was my first prank.
or maybe that was my first prank,
But it was definitely unintentional.
but it was definitely unintentional.
But there were also lessons from my dad.
But there were also lessons from my dad.
Serious lessons that got me an incredibly early start in engineering.
Serious lessons that got me an incredibly early start in engineering.
These lessons would always start because I'd ask a question.
These lessons would always start because I'd ask a question.
And I had a lot of questions.
And I had a lot of questions.
Because my dad was an engineer, there were
Because my dad was an engineer,
all kinds of interesting things lying around my house.
there were all kinds of interesting things lying around my house.
And when you're in a house and there are resistors lying around everywhere,
And when you're in a house and there are resistors lying around everywhere,
you ask,
what's
that?
What's that?
What's a resistor?
What's a resistor?
And my dad would always give me an answer.
And my dad would always give me an answer.
A really good answer, even
A really good answer.
7-year-old could understand.
Even a 7-year-old could understand.
He was just an extremely good teacher.
He was just an extremely good teacher and
Communicator. He never started out by trying to explain from the top down what a resistor is.
He never started out by trying to explain from the top down what a resistor is.
He started from the beginning.
He started from the beginning.
Going all the way back to atoms and electrons.
Going all the way back to atoms and electrons.
Neutrons and protons.
Neutrons and protons.
He explained what they were and how everything was made from those.
He explained what they were and how everything was made from those.
I remember we actually spent weeks and weeks talking about different types of atoms.
I remember we actually spent weeks and weeks talking about different types of atoms.
And then I learned how electrons can actually flow through things.
And then I learned how electrons can actually flow through things.
Like wires. Then, finally, he explained to me how the resistors work.
He explained to me how the resistors work.
Not by calculations.
Not by calculations.
Because who can do calculations when you're a second grader?
Because who can do calculations when you're a second grader?
But by real common sense pictures and explanations.
But by real common sense pictures and explanations.
You see, he gave me classical electronics training from the beginning.
From the beginning.
For engineers, there's a point in life when you understand things like how a resistor works.
For engineers, there is a point in life when you understand things like how a resistor works.
Usually it comes much later for people
Usually it comes much later for people
than it did for me.
than it did for me.
By the 4th grade, I really did understand things like that.
By the 4th grade, I really did understand things like that.
And my dad was always around to help me understand.
And my dad was always around to help me understand still more things.
And still more things, like light.
Like light.
How does a light bulb work?
How does a light bulb work?
I wanted to know.
I wanted to know.
Not many people my age knew.
Not many people my age knew.
Probably most people who are grown up still don't.
Probably most people who are grown up still don't.
But he explained it to me.
But he explained it to me.
First, how lights are made.
First, how lights are made.
Then how electrons went through wires.
Then how electrons went through wires.
And how those were what made a light bulb glow.
And how those were what made the light bulb glow.
And I wanted to know how.
And I wanted to know how.
How did it glow?
How did it glow?
So he went back to the beginning, explaining to me how Thomas Edison invented light bulbs.
Explaining to me how Thomas Edison invented light bulbs.
And what he had to figure out to do it.
And what he had to figure out to do it.
He realized that basically you had to create a vacuum.
He realized that basically you had to create a vacuum.
It had to be a vacuum because if there were oxygen
It had to be a vacuum because if there were oxygen in it,
the wire would just burn up when it
the wire would just burn up
got hot.
when it got hot.
So this vacuum, remember a vacuum has no air in it.
So this vacuum, remember vacuum has no air in it,
is in this little bulb.
Is in this little bulb.
And the point was to get heat.
And the point was to get heat.
By moving a lot of electrons through a wire.
By moving a lot of electrons through a wire.
Into it.
Into it.
And the more electrons.
And the more electrons.
That go through the wire. That
go through the wire.
Is the higher the current.
That is, the higher the current.
The brighter the light bulb will glow.
The brighter the light bulb will glow.